I hope everybody can hear as your audios are connecting and just dotting the I's and crossing the T's here for a moment.
I'm here.
Hi, Patty.
Hi,
Good
Kara.
to see you. Okay, we are
Morning,
live
Rob.
streaming.
Hello, Patty. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you.
Good,
For an
good.
early Wednesday morning.
Yeah.
You're in
I've
the
heard.
future.
To be sure, to be sure.
Okay. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us here today. We're just getting a rolling start here while I get all organized. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and do the introductions here. So happy everybody's here. Welcome to the Meditation Conversation, the podcast to support your spiritual revolution. I'm your host, Kara Goodwin, and I am so excited today to be joined by Rob Gentile. So Rob has spent his career as a sales engineer in the steel industry. He and his wife, Melanie, have devoted themselves to their special needs daughter, Maria, who's in her 20s, and whom Rob refers to as pure spirit. Throughout her childhood, he grappled with difficult questions about prayer and why children must suffer. Answers came in a sudden and unexpected way. At age 56, he had a massive heart attack, then flatlined and had a near-death experience. Self-discovery and spiritual awakening continued while waiting to receive a donor heart. He's the author of the #1 bestseller, Quarks of Light, which recounts his spiritual journey and mystical life-changing experience. So I'm so excited to talk to Rob today and learn more about his story, although I do highly recommend that you read his book, Quarks of Light. It is filled with amazing mystical experience, and just there's so much humanity with his story. It's very relatable, so many ups and downs, and fascinating insights as well since he received his donor heart. So there's a lot of great stuff in there. I think you'll get a lot out of it. But and just to let you know, the way that we'll do this today, we'll get to know Rob a little bit. I've got some questions for him, and then I will open it up so that you can ask your own questions for those of you who are joining us on the Zoom. So there will be time for your own questions as well as we go. So welcome, Rob. Thanks so much for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's awesome to be here. I appreciate the opportunity.
So you've had this incredible journey with your health that culminated in near-death experiences, two of
Yeah.
them, and a heart transplant, all against the backdrop of this deep bond that you have with your daughter, Maria, who has special needs.
Yeah.
Can you share with us the story of your background?
Sure, absolutely. And thank you for, Maria's kind of like my hero. Maria's 28 now. She has a rare neurological disease that only strikes girls, interestingly enough. She's my only child, but she cannot walk, talk, feed herself. But she is very spiritually evolved. And our relationship, because of my near-death experience, changed dramatically, actually, after I died, and transformed my life. But I'm originally from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And my parents were Italian immigrants. My father worked in the steel mill. I worked in the steel mill. My brothers worked in the steel mill. I live in North Carolina now. But and ironically, what happened to me was at age 56, I was having some pain in my neck from sports injuries when I was younger. And these bone spurs had been accumulating in my neck and causing all kind of neurological pain. So ironically, the doctor, a very famous Korean doctor, was in Pittsburgh. So I actually went home to Pittsburgh and had this operation, and it was something that this Korean doctor created himself. It was one of a kind technology and surgery. So instead of cutting the back of your neck open to take these bone spurs off, and then they fuse your discs and you're in pain the rest of your life, he invented a process where he goes in through the front It's called a foraminal anatomy, and he cuts you in the neck and moves your esophagus aside and drills out these bone spurs. So it's a simple operation. And I was only in the hospital one night. It was successful. And I came back to Pittsburgh, and back to Charlotte, North Carolina from Pittsburgh. And unfortunately, 4 nights later in my bed, for what we know now, I threw a blood clot and it went right into my widowmaker, my LAD, and it killed me instantly. So I had this massive heart attack in my bed. And my wife, when it happened, it was like 11 o'clock at night. So she hears all this screaming and thrashing around. She thought it was my daughter Maria having a seizure. She ran down the hall. Maria was fine. She comes back in and turns on the light, and it's me flopping around in the bed. So calls the ambulance, and thankfully they got there quickly. I only lived 3 miles from the hospital. The EMT driver knew I was having a heart attack. He just didn't know how bad it was. So what's interesting about this whole story, is that when I got into the emergency room, they put me in a room right away. Now it's about 11:30, 12 o'clock at night. The cardiologist is not in the hospital. He was on call. So they gave me some medicine to just calm me down and get the blood flowing again. And my wife is in the room with the nurse, and I'm unconscious. I had passed out from the pain at my home. So I'm completely unconscious. And the nurse turns to my wife and says, look, we've given him some nitroglycerin. He should be fine until the cardiologist gets here. And interestingly, my wife, and I described this in the book, she said it was like a scene from the movie The Exorcist. I sprung forward on the gurney. As soon as the nurse said that, my eyes popped wide open, and I sprung forward from the waist up as if someone had grabbed me and pulled me up with great force. My eyes popped open. I shouted out the name Frosty, and then I collapsed backward on the gurney and flatlined. So code blue rang out through the hospital, and in rushed a team of doctors who began to work on me. So they began to work on me, and now she's one of my best friends, an Indian doctor by the name of Dr. Patel, began to work on me with her team, and they could not resuscitate me for 20 minutes. All of this is in my public medical records. So I began to shut down. All of my organs began shutting down. Finally, the cardiologist, Dr. Bajwa, arrives. He does an emergency cath up through my leg, finds the blockage in my widowmaker. He puts 2 stents in, and blood starts to flow, but it was too late. I went into cardiogenic shock and respiratory failure. So they intubated me, and from there, I would lay in a 4-day coma.
Wow.
So that's how my journey, started. Now, interestingly, this is where I had my first near-death experience, because what happened is that, they brought in, I was raised Catholic, I'm Christian. My oldest brother, who still lives in Pittsburgh, drove down, called the parish priest. The priest came in, anointed me with ashes and oil. In the Catholic faith, they call that extreme unction. You only get it one time in your life to face God. And there was a team of neurologists that were coming in and out of the room, out of ICU for 4 days, trying to find out whether or not I was brain dead. I don't know how they do that. But on the 4th day, the doctor said, look, we can't wait any longer. They pulled the tubes out. They said to my wife, he's probably going to be a vegetable, but we can't wait any longer. We're going to pull the tubes and see if he can breathe on his own. So obviously I did. But what's fascinating about this story is, so my wife was the first one to come into the room when I was in the ICU and I came out of that coma. And I said to her, she said I was talking like a child, and I said to her, Melanie, you have to believe me. You have to believe me. It was Frosty. It was Frosty. He came to me, talked to me. And she said, oh my God, that makes total sense now. I said, what are you talking about? She said, well, right before you flatlined, you popped up on the gurney and you screamed out Frosty's name. So to give you some background, so Frosty was my brother-in-law. He was the same age as me. And unfortunately, Frosty had taken his own life 7 weeks before I died that night. And Frosty was going through a divorce. He had had some drug problems in the past, but he was clean for a number of years. He was living in the upstairs bedroom at his parents' house. He had one daughter in college, owned his own business. And, it was around Christmas and all that pressure was building up. And he decided one last time to go out and blow off some steam. And unfortunately, he got hold of a street drug that just drove him mad for like 40 minutes. And he came back and took his own life. So this was my first experience into this, spiritual realm, having this wild thing happen to me. And my wife said to me, she said, "Tell me exactly what Frosty said to you." And Frosty said to me, "I've made a big mess out of things. You have to go back and help clean things up. But tell my parents I'm in a good place." So the reason why this is important to me is that there I was laying there. I just came out of coma. My arms were paralyzed. And I'm thinking to myself, Frosty told me he was in a good place. Being raised Catholic, I know they've changed the rules, but back then, when I was raised Catholic, mortal sin, it was a mortal sin. In other words, you went straight to hell if you took your own life. So I'm thinking, this guy's telling me he's in a really good place and he's happy. So it was a huge paradigm shift in my belief system. It kind of like opened the door. And I began to see the Creator. I began to see God in a completely different light. Like, how could a loving Creator ever condemn someone for such a complicated, act like suicide? And so that was the first part of that experience. The second day coming out of coma was even just as interesting. So here comes Dr. Patel, this beautiful little Indian woman who refused to give up on me. I mean, I was dead for more than 20 minutes. She should have called it like after 5 minutes. But there was something that made her continue to work on me. So she came into my room and she sat down. She knew my arms were paralyzed, so she put her hand on my arms and she introduced herself, and "This is who I am, and I'm the doctor that wouldn't give up on you." And she began to cry, and how many times I almost lost you, didn't think you were going to make it. And then the conversation got real personal, and I found that odd because she began to talk about her father. Never met this person. And she said, "Rob, my father and I were very close, and so close that we could almost read each other's minds. And he helped me through medical school. And he was living just to see my firstborn son." And she said, I was more than 6 months pregnant. And all of a sudden, I got the phone call that my father, who lived in Texas, died suddenly from a brain aneurysm. And she said, "I'm Hindu and I have a very strong spiritual relationship. And so did my father." But she said, "Ever since he passed, I've been very, very bitter. I've kind of lost my spirituality." But she said, "But seeing you here alive, which is impossible, it gives me hope that just maybe something is out there." And then, Cara, it hit me like a ton of bricks. As she was telling me that story, the puzzle kind of unscrambled, because when she was working on me, another male spirit had entered the room. And I kept hearing over and over and over again, "Keep working on him. Don't give up. You can save him. Keep working on him. You can save him." And I realized in that moment that it was her father speaking to her through me, even though, she couldn't hear him the way I was hearing him. Something compelled her to continue to work on me. And, I didn't have the courage in that moment to tell her because I thought this woman's going to think I'm crazy. So it was a year later, after I came back from Chicago, which we'll get into, that I interviewed her, the cardiologist, Dr. Bajwa, and Dr. Carson, who was the doctor that intubated me. I went back to the hospital and interviewed all three of them for my book. So that's how my story started.
Wow. Well, let me come on here. Thank you so much for taking us through that. That's remarkable. I had forgotten the part that the doctor's father had been coming through
Yeah,
as well. That's just
yeah,
amazing.
it was incredible, incredible. And
So,
Dr. Bajwa and I now, Dr. Patel and I now, every year on his birthday, we always take the time to talk. But
connect.
we talk a lot, but yeah.
That's amazing. So that was NDE number one.
Yeah,
So you had another one that was really kind of took you, it felt like into more of a quantum space, a quantum experience. So can you talk us through that?
sure. Yes. So what happened is that, coming out of, and this was in January of 2016. So coming out of coma and into rehab, Dr. Patel and team and Dr. Bajwa told me that, Rob, your heart is completely destroyed. The only way you're going to survive is with a heart transplant. So before I was released, they had hooked me up to all kind of gadgets. The first thing I had was a defibrillator vest, which kind of looks like a policeman's vest, which actually shocks you back to life every time. I talk about PTSD, every time your
Wow.
heart goes out, which for me was often. So I had this battery pack on my right shoulder. I got this vest on, but shortly after that, my heart continued to weaken. So they actually had to put a port in my chest. So they cut my chest and they put this port in, which was dripping this medicine called milrinone. And milrinone is, my doctor said, you think of it as like STP for the heart. So it squeezes the heart, it makes it pump, but it also starts the clock ticking. It wears the heart out very quickly. So I've got this, I'm walking around, I'm this time bomb of a human being walking around like a zombie. So now I have this other battery pack on my left shoulder with this bag, putting this medicine on my heart every 60 seconds. So I went to all the transplant centers in North Carolina. Actually, I sent my records all over the country with the help of my wife, who's a pharmacist, and I could not get a heart. Everyone turned me down because the list to get a heart, there's so many people that die every day waiting for a heart transplant is criminal. So couldn't get a heart, and my employer at the time was based out of Chicago. So I called my boss and I said, Paul, I can't get a heart. I'm just going to die naturally. Obviously, I'm resigning from the company. And he said, well, before you do that, let me talk to the owner. So lo and behold, I didn't know that the owner of the company, heart disease ran in his family, and he's a philanthropist that donated a lot of money to the University of Chicago Medicine in the cardiac department. So he actually helped me get into the University of Chicago Medicine. And in April, my wife and I were on a plane. I got to the University of Chicago Medicine. They had no idea how I was even walking around. I'm about 174 pounds. I had atrophied down to about 132 pounds. I was a skeleton, green skeleton.
Mm.
So it was there that I had met an extraordinary doctor by the name of Dr. Juvanandan, another Indian man who, lo and behold, had been working on a heart pump for like 15 years. And he came to me and he said, Rob, there's no way that you're going to live because we have no idea when a donor heart is going to arrive. He said, but I've been working on this heart pump called the New Pulse. It's a counter pulsation device. And he said, it's about the size of a lunchbox. And we go in, we cut you, we put this little balloon down through your aorta and out your left side. We're going to put this titanium disc through your rib cage, and these wires are going to come out and run this pump with an iPad. And he said, you'll be able to walk around so you don't atrophy anymore, and it's going to keep you alive until your donor heart comes. And I said, wow, that's fantastic, doc. I've never heard of this thing. I said, how many people have had this thing? And he kind of looked down at the floor and he said, well, that's just it. We've only used this on cows. So he said, you'll be the first. but we need 3 weeks of human data in order to take this thing to the FDA and get it approved for human trials. So, so I was actually the second recipient. There was one guy before me that had it, but it was only in him for like 48 hours, and his donor heart arrived. So they kind of knew that it would work, but I was the one that, got the data in order to go get it to the FDA. So it's a great story because now the new pulse is being used as a bridge for transplant all around the country, and it's been helping a lot of people. So I had the new pulse put in me, which the first device was very clunky, and with every heartbeat, it was like, clunk, clunk. Couldn't sleep, and those nurses would come in and cry, how do you sleep? And my wife nicknamed it the thumper, which is in the book. But anyway, even with the new pulse, my heart continued to just give out. So, I find this to be a very interesting part of the story, and we could talk about this because I've come to understand through this whole experience, and I'm still learning, that everything happens in spirit first. We're spiritual beings having a human experience. And I know we hear that a lot, but it's so much deeper than that. And this is kind of like a primary example. So, and I won't spoil the book because there's some other things that had happened along the way. So they had found something in me that disqualified me to get a heart transplant. So there are certain medical things that will disqualify you because hearts are in such short supply that they can't risk giving you a heart if you've got another medical condition that will kill you anyway shortly afterwards. So they had found something in me, and I'll never forget the day my transplant team comes in, and I was very close to all of my doctors. They're beautiful people. And they said, Rob, we found something in you, and we have to take you off the list. So I'll never forget that night. I called my wife, and of course, she almost had a nervous breakdown. But what was interesting is that I was in the University of Chicago Medicine on the 8th floor, facing Lake Michigan. And, when you're that high up, it's almost like you're in the middle of the, of the water. And Lake Michigan's a huge body of water. It looks like the ocean. So I'm laying there, feeling sorry for myself and knowing that I was going to die. And all of a sudden, this incredible storm comes out of nowhere and whips up off the lake. And thunder and lightning and sheets of rain that I had, they were like breaking through the window. I mean, never seen anything like that, slamming against the window. I'm in there alone. And all of a sudden, it's almost as if a dark entity had entered the room and it was baiting me, trying to weaken me, and it was working. So this entity was reminding me of every mistake that I'd ever made in my life, convincing me that I had no value, all the negative thoughts that I'd had about my daughter. I had prayed for my daughter to die in the past, felt guilty about that because I was tired of seeing her suffering. All of these things I was being reminded of, and it was weakening my spirit, which then weakens the body. And before you know it, my heart went into tachycardia. I began sweating profusely. My chest was pounding. And I just cried out, do with me what you will. And I just let go. I had prayed to die. And that's when it happened. In the next moment, which is very difficult to describe, I found myself standing in the middle of nowhere. And what's curious about it is that I could see myself down in my hospital bed in my broken, atrophied body in that green, horrible green nightgown they make you wear. And I could see myself suspended in the middle of this vacuum, perfect and whole, in the same green nightgown. And I thought to myself, what could possibly be happening here? This is inexplicable, what's happening. And it was kind of like, I guess one of the ways to describe this is it's kind of like flying in an airplane on a clear, beautiful, sunny day where all you see is blue skies, but really you're looking at nothing. You see everything, but you're looking at nothing at all. And that's what it was like originally. And then I understood that I was in a different place, which I call the ethereal. It's kind of like this in-between place where the veil is just pulled back enough for you to realize that you're out of your body and you're in this in-between. And in that moment, being a Christian, I felt very disappointed because I didn't see God. I didn't see Jesus Christ. My parents who had gone before me didn't come to greet me like you hear. I didn't hear any music. I couldn't smell anything, taste anything, touch anything, feel anything. It was just me standing in the middle of nowhere alone. But then, as clear as I'm speaking to you, God expressed as a concept. These were concepts that I wholly understood. And it was like these things were being impressed on my spirit. And then I began to hear in my spirit, this is the divine source, the foundation for everything. This is your real identity. My power is omnipotent. These kind of messages, Cara, started coming through just like I'm talking to you. And what really struck me is this is your real identity. And I knew in that moment that I came through my parents, but not from my parents. This is where I came from. I came from this divine, loving God. And I realized in that moment that I was not my body, my race, nor my religion. This was my real identity. And in that place, I knew that God expresses and experiences life through us. And how does the Creator do that? Through our spirit. That's why my spirit was so weakened by all of these negative thoughts and feelings of, shame and guilt and bitterness and anger and all of these negative things that it not only crushes our spirit, but then it manifests in the body. And those were things that I'm beginning to study now, the spiritual root of sickness and disease, because I understand now that most of it starts in the spirit. But anyway, so the next part of that experience is that once I understood where I was and that I was in the presence of the Creator, it was almost as if it felt like the grains of my being were made of sand, and somebody picked me up and just threw me and scattered me across this infinite, timeless universe. And it was there that I felt like I was connected to everything all at once. And it was there that I saw and became part of this magnificent web of twinkling lights. And that's where, the cover and the name of the book comes from. So we all know from science what a neuron looks like. A neuron has a nucleus, and then it has dendrites and tentacles, and they're woven together just like, the star system or your brain or anything else, your neurological system. It's all the same design, by the way. So I saw this magnificent web of twinkling lights, and it was shown to me that inside each nucleus was this quark of light or spark of light. And it was shown to me that quarks, some people call them photons, but quarks are the smallest building blocks of matter. And these quarks, they combine to create infinite possibilities in the universe. They could become a tree, a person, a dog, or a planet. And it was in that moment that I was shown that God uses light to create, heal, and transform us. We're all made of the same stuff. We just manifest differently. And I thought, oh my goodness, how simple this formula is. Of course, it's going to be that simple, right? It's only human beings that make it complicated. But that's the formula for creation. It's light. And when I was part of this web connected to everyone and everything, it was a message of unity. And I thought, if I hurt myself, I hurt everything connected to me. But if I love, the light will spread. And in that moment, I realized that loneliness here in this temporal world is an illusion. So how can we ever be lonely when we're connected to everything? Although it's hard for us to see. This was a message of oneness. We're all connected. We're all one. We're all made of the same stuff. We all come from the same place. So what in the world are we fighting about on this planet? I have no idea. But, it was in that moment that I had this profound experience with my daughter, Maria. So I should say to you that communication in this place that I call the ethereal was telepathic and synchronistic at the same time. There were no words. I couldn't hear anything, but if I wanted to know the answer to any question, all I had to do was think about it. And I'm standing there experiencing all this, and out of this web comes my daughter, Maria. And there she is, standing there perfect and whole. And she has this light coming through her eyes. And it's not the kind of light we see here in the temporal world, but it's that spiritual light that animates all life. And for the first time in 20 years, we had a conversation. And I asked her, I said, Maria, I've never heard your voice. I've never heard you say, I love you, Daddy. Your mother and I have taken you all over the world to find a cure, to ease your suffering. I said, tell me, please tell me, what can we do for you to help you? And she said 3 words that transformed my life. She said, just love me. And when she said, just love me, I cried out into that infinite expanse that I never wanted to leave this place. And when I said that, I found myself back in my hospital bed. And that was the end of my experience.
Wow. Let me come back here on. Oh my goodness. That is so powerful. And as you were speaking, as you were going through your story, I just thought, I think Rob must have told this story hundreds of times by now. And you still bring through this beautiful energy with it and this flow and this such depth. It's really an honor to for you to share that, such a sacred experience. Just beautiful.
Thank you. Sacred is the best way to describe it. Yeah, I like that.
Yeah. So thank you for that.
You're
And
welcome.
I do want to give everybody a chance to ask questions because I know it's a special opportunity to be able to do that. While you can just raise your hands if you want to, there's a react button. At least that's how it's shown for me in my version of Zoom. You can raise your hands or you can put them in the chat. While we wait for questions, I would love to hear your heart transplant story because you've gone into this quantum space with the quarks of light and your daughter, but the last we knew, you weren't going to get a heart. So how did things play out from there?
This is another miraculous part of the story. When I found myself back in my bed, I was laying there and I said, I've been fulfilled now. I know where I'm going. I no longer have fear. I also know that regardless of what happens to me, that my daughter is going to be fine because she's perfect and whole in the spiritual realm. So what is it that I have to fear? And when I let go, I heard a voice say, tell your story. And it was then that I knew that something was going to happen in order for me to live. And interestingly enough, it was like a few days later, my transplant team came in and said, hey, Rob, we want an exception with the government. And they gave us the okay to transplant you. Now, you have to do X, Y, and Z after you get your heart, sign these papers, and we'll put you back on the 1A, what they call the 1A list to get your heart. Now, what's curious about this is that after that happened, my doctor had come to me and he said, we have a heart that's available. It came available. But he said it's very, very risky because it's way too small. You might get about 7-8 years of life out of it, but I don't think you're going to make it another day. So you better think about whether or not you want to take it. And I said, Dr. Uriel, just give me one night to pray about this, and you come back tomorrow morning and I'll have an answer for you. So he came back and I said, I don't want that heart.
Sorry to interject here. Say one more time the name of that doctor.
Dr. Uriel. And Uriel is, as you know,
I just think it's important for you to highlight that.
yeah, Uriel is one of the angels, one of the archangels. So Dr. Uriel came to me, and I said, Dr. Uriel, I don't want the heart. There's something not right. I'm going to wait. And he just rolled his eyes and walked out of the room. And so after that, it was another week or so that the heart that I have now showed up. And I don't want to give too much away about the heart, Cara, but I'm happy to talk about how, what I learned through my research and after getting my heart transplant. It's important that everyone understands that. So when you get a heart, you have to live near the hospital for a year because it's a very critical time. The heart can get infected easily. It can reject out of the body. So to get down to the nuts and bolts of it, hospitals make a lot of money on organ transplantation, particularly hearts. My heart is like $1.5 million. So they want to make sure that everything goes well, because if you die or the heart rejects, they can lose their transplant license. So that was another thing that I call kind of like divine intervention, because I had to get an apartment and live alone. My wife would come up whenever she could, but not very often because she had to take care of my daughter. But living alone for a year in that apartment in Chicago, away from Maria and my wife, gave me the opportunity to start writing my book. And I should say that one of the things that really helped me write the book is that 18 months, Maria was 18 months old when she got sick, and we realized something was terribly wrong. So I began to journal, and I got into that habit of journaling, both written and oral, with a little tape recorder. And I journaled all the way through heart transplant in Chicago. So when I got home and decided to write my book, I was able to just pull all those journals out, and that really helped me write my book. And the power of journaling is amazing, because you can never remember all these things properly, because the mind, as you know, probably done these things in high school. Someone starts a story in the front of the room and it's completely different. So the memory plays tricks on you, but when you journal it in the moment, it's a documentary, right? So that really helped. But yes, so after I got my heart, and it took me 2 years to find out who the donor was, because the family doesn't have to answer you at all. So that was a very long process as well. But I could talk to you about, the things that began to happen actually immediately after transplant. I've got a really funny story to share with you. So when I came out of the ICU, this was after transplant. I'll never forget when I woke up from the medication. It's a feeling that's kind of inexplicable to describe, because I immediately knew that there was another being living inside me. And I remember holding on to the bed rails, and because the heart was so strong that it was like pumping me back and forth, and I'm holding on to the bed rails because it felt like I was going to get pushed out of the bed. So the first 4 days at ICU, I had this doctor. They called him Dr. O because his last name was so long, nobody can pronounce it. And And Dr. O, it was the doctor, the mysterious doctor that would go out in the middle of the night to get the hearts. So I remember that first day, and he had the driest sense of humor of any human being on the planet. It was like torture trying to talk to this guy. So I remember, that first day holding on to the rails, and I could feel this other being living inside me. And I said, Dr. O, you gotta tell me. I said, what did you put inside me? I could feel this thing taking over my being. I could feel another human being living inside me. This thing is beating so strong. I said, you have to tell me. And he looked at me with a straight face. And of course, you're still on medication and you're just coming out of this haze, right? And he looked at me straight in the face and he said, oh, we put a Jaguar heart in you, kid. And he turned around and walked out of the room. And I remember asking the nurse, I said, could you please get my cell phone? Because I want to research if it's possible to put an animal heart in a human being. But he kept this up for like the whole time that I was in there. Finally, on the fourth day, I was getting released back to my regular room out of ICU. And I said, Dr. O, are you going to tell me or not? And he said, all right. He said, he said, I can't tell you anything about the donor. You have to write a letter to the transplant, Gift of Hope, the transplant organ donation company. And then they anonymously send it to the family. And then the family has the right to answer you or not. And you have to wait a year because you have to let them mourn. But he said, here's what I can tell you. He said, the heart is so intelligent that when you take your birth heart, you take a person's birth heart out and you put in someone else's heart, the body rejects it immediately because it knows it's not in its birth home. And it goes through a phenomenon called SAG, where it refuses to beat. So he said, we literally, almost like jumping a car battery, he said, we literally have to jump the heart to get it to start, or else it would just lay there and wouldn't start. And he said, but I have to tell you, we've rarely seen this. Yours was a kind of a special case. I said, what do you mean? He said, the minute we put that heart in you, it just took off running.
And they didn't have to jump it.
Didn't have to jump it.
Wow.
So that was kind of like one of those moments of clarity where I said, okay, I've got to figure out what in the world makes all this work and how this is happening, because I could feel this other human being, the essence of another human being expressing in me. And it got, as time went on, it got stronger and stronger and stronger. And my taste in music began to change, and food and all these things. So when I was in Chicago, I began to research how the heart interacts with the body and why heart transplantation works in the first place. And here's what I found out. So the heart, and scientists just discovered this recently, probably in the past decade, the heart has a brain, which is what makes heart transplantation work, one of the things. So when you think about it, the heart is one of the first things that forms in a mother's womb. It's the heart that pumps the blood and oxygen and nutrients to the rest of the fetus, the brain, so the fetus begins to form. So this relationship between the heart and the brain starts in the mother's womb very early on. So a lot of our preferences are stored there because obviously these two have to communicate all the time. And how they communicate is even more fascinating. So the heart communicates with the brain in 4 different ways. It communicates neurologically. It communicates biochemically through hormones. It communicates through pulse waves, which is our parasympathetic, sympathetic nervous system. And the most fascinating way that the heart communicates, which is very, very interesting, is it communicates through an electromagnetic field. Now, curiously, this electromagnetic field in the heart is over 100 times more powerful than the electromagnetic field being generated by the brain. So this electromagnetic field and they were able to, scientists are now able to see this thing and understand how it works through a special device called electromagnometers. So the heart energy, this field, comes out from the heart in a 3-foot radius around our bodies. One could call it our aura. And this is how we communicate with other human beings and animals without language. This is where our intuition resides. So, for example, when someone walks into a room, we've all experienced this or gone to dinner with someone, and we say to ourselves, oh, I could feel that person's energy, good or bad. It's coming from this electromagnetic field in the heart. And what influences that is the things that we think about, things that we listen to. The heart, if we are focused on kindness and joy and appreciation and all of these positive things, okay, what it does, it creates what's called a rhythmic heart pattern, which is how your heart performs the best all the time. There's this beautiful rhythmic, just like when you take an EEG, there's this perfect heart pattern. But then when we focus on negative things, hatred, judgment, violence, all of these things, bitterness, anger, it sends the heart into this chaotic pattern, okay, which then in turn affects the neurological system, our hormone production, the way we digest our food, all of it. So all of this is tied together. So this is how the brain and the heart communicate. But more importantly is it's all about the heart. It's coming from the heart. Now, of course, again, it affects our thoughts, but the heart doesn't think, but the brain does. But however we're communicating what we're thinking about to this brain affects the rest of us. And I've had this happen to myself, let work get in the way or get in a bad mood about something. And even though you're silent about it, you walk in the room and your spouse or partner, anybody says, what's the matter with you? You're in a bad mood. It's coming from the heart. That's where this is being generated from. So that is something that has led me now, probably my next book and some of the things that I'm studying about are the spiritual root of disease and how when we allow these negative thoughts to take over our mind and our space, where are they really coming from? And, like I said, everything happens in spirit first. We're spiritual beings. And when we go down this path of negative thinking, just like me, it actually threw me into, a state where my heart went into tachycardia and I had a massive anxiety attack and died, right? I mean, it's that powerful. So we have to think about where this is coming from. Is it coming from the darkness? I believe it is, because here's what I want to get back to very, very briefly. When I was in the web, there were some parts of the web that were darker than others. And I didn't understand it at the time. And I thought, well, why isn't, the whole web lit up so brilliantly? And I came to understand that those dark parts of the web were where human beings were not allowing this love and light of God to express through them. Remember, God experiences and expresses life through us. It's the only way God can experience life. So when we're not allowing that love and light to express through us, then our light isn't as bright. It's kind of like dim, it's dim in the web and it's dim on the earth. So this web that I saw is nothing more than a reflection. It's kind of like a mirror. And it's the same light and dark struggles that humanity has been dealing with since the beginning of time. It's the same battle, right? And I'll tell you what, here's how we allow this love and light of God to express through us. So our light illuminates the path for others. It's by finding our purpose. It's through purpose that we shine the brightest. It's like those 3 doctors that I went back that saved my life that night that I interviewed, and Dr. Uriel. They are living their purpose. And this is how they allow this love and light of God to shine through them, and why they're just not just doctors, but avatars. They're the ones that, they're not mechanics. These are the ones that really make the difference in our lives. And I think that that's a call to action for all of us. We have to understand that how we allow the love and light of God to express through us while we're here is all that matters. The rest is folly.
That is powerful. Thank you. Wow. Well, I do want to ask here, Judith had a great question. She said, can you talk more about the importance of letting go of fear and doubt?
Well, Judith, that's a great question. And it's something that, we all struggle with. But I have to tell you that, I'm Christian, and sometimes I go back to scripture to realize and to remember what God has said about us, right? Because we're born out of this love and light of God, and that we were not given the spirit of fear. We're born to be fearless, and we're born to be whole, and we're born to be healthy, and we're entitled to joy and to live without fear. And those are easy words to talk about, hard to live. I myself even struggle with it. So I find ways to stay centered through meditation, through nature, through spending time with my daughter, because I could see God in her face. That wasn't her fault that she got this illness. I really do believe that at least 80% of the illnesses that we all have come from allowing ourselves to become fearful, which then interacts with the heart, which tells the brain to keep thinking these thoughts. We're in this one big negative loop, and it affects our health and our energy and the way we relate to others. So I do silly things like put positive aphorisms on my mirror at home. I'll pick something to meditate on one day when I get really stressed out. I still work full-time as a sales engineer. I'll go out and take a walk and interact with nature. Whatever it is that gives you that opportunity to connect with creation, I would say do as much as you can when you find yourself in those fearful places.
Love it. Sorry, bear with me. Let me come back on here. That's beautiful. And I love this embodiment of the expressions that came through your experiences, and how much you've helped it align your day-to-day, or seemingly your day-to-day experiences. You've mentioned a couple of times that you grew up with the Catholic faith, and I know that these experiences that you've had don't necessarily, they're not completely compatible with what you must have been taught as you grew up. So how has that changed your spiritual life in terms of, since your NDEs?
That's a great question. So, you know what, Cara, I think that what we all have to do is we have to come to a place of discernment. I realize that, and I mentioned this early on because I don't want to criticize the Catholic faith or anybody else's faith, but, like I said, when I grew up, suicide was a mortal sin, right? Straight to the lake of fire, no coming back. But now they've changed that. So what's that tell you? These are man-made laws that suit whatever the teaching is at the time that they want to express through the church for whatever reason, whatever ulterior motive, or whatever changes in that particular diocese. But to me, when you stay rooted in the truth, and the truth is that we're all one, we're all connected, we come from a loving God filled with love and light, who wants us to be joyful, healthy, whole, to love one another, because we're all connected. And I think that in the end, what we have to realize is that the only way we're going to find peace within ourselves and peace within our world is to realize that we're all connected and we're all one. And we have to come to that place. I'm not saying that we let people off the hook when they do evil things. We all have to be responsible for our own actions. And what I've learned now through my journey is that the only thing we can be responsible for is our own actions, but God ultimately controls the outcome. I'm a living, breathing example of that. There's no way I should be here. No way. So I couldn't control the outcome. You know, I took care of myself my whole life. I was a martial artist. I exercised. I eat clean food. I did all of these things. And then this fluky thing of, you know, this blood clot takes me out, right? And then all of these other things line up to bring me back for whatever reason. There's no way anybody could. That's all divine intervention.
Mm. That's so beautiful. Thank you. Okay, well, we have just a couple of minutes here to finish up. Can you please tell everybody how they can connect with your work and get your book and so forth?
Oh, absolutely. Thank you for allowing me to do that. So it's very simple. You can go to my website, which is robagentile.com. And you could find my book on Amazon or any bookseller, Quarks of Light, a near-death experience. I think I have a. There it is. There's the web.
Beautiful.
But again, the website is robagentile.com. And there's a link there where you can send me an email and connect with me.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much, Rob. I feel floaty and full.
Oh,
And
good.
just you've really transmitted a lot of divinity here that I feel in my heart, in my aura. So I really thank you. And thank you so much to everybody who has joined here on the Zoom and everybody who's listening in the future, in our future. It's really been a blessing. Thank you so much.
You're quite welcome. Oh, I see. Okay, that was just a thank you. Yep. Thanks again for having me, Carl. It's been a real honor.
Wonderful. Thanks. Have a great day, everybody. Bye.
Blessings.